chapter 10 and verses 29 and 30, we read that Moses said to Hobab, the son of Raguel, the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law, "We are journeying unto the place of which the Lord said, I will give it you. Come thou with us, and we will do thee good. For the Lord hath spoken good concerning Israel." And he, that's Hobab, said unto him, that's Moses, "I will not go, but I will depart to mine own land and to my kindred." Late in the World War II, American bombers, some of them were sent to bomb hostile Europe. Their mission was essentially to stop the supply of oil to the Nazis. They were sailing over this hostile ground then. Hundreds of aeroplanes were sent and dispatched by the Americans. And sadly, many of them, virtually all of them, were gunned down by the Nazis. Now, these men who were sent on this mission, as they were gunned down in Yugoslavia. They landed in what is known today as Yugoslavia. And as they parachuted down, I'm sure you can imagine the fear that would have gripped these American pilots. They, of course, would be expected to be captured and probably killed, or at the very least, imprisoned. But instead, there was a remarkable rescue team, and they were in place ready to intercept these failing airmen. You see, what had happened is Serbian peasants had tracked the path of this crashing plane, and their sole mission was essentially a search and rescue mission. It was to find these crashed American pilots and to bring them to safe and neutral ground. You can look it up on the net if you so desire. It was known as Operation Haylord. And what essentially these Serbians did was they got these American pilots, they took them by the hand, and they brought them to safe land. And in Numbers chapter 10, we see Moses, and what is he doing? He's taking this individual Hobab, he's taking him literally by the hand, and he wants Hobab to join him on his journey. He has this man, and he simply says to him in verse 29, "Come thou with us, come with the people of God, and we will do thee good." Now, who was this man Hobab is probably the first question that springs to mind. Well, it may surprise you that there's been a little bit of debate about who this man was. But verse 29 tells us who he was. Hobab, look at it, the son of Raguel, the Midianite. Notice it, Moses' father-in-law. And so here we find Hobab is described as the son of Raguel, the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law. Now in Exodus chapter 18, we meet Moses' father-in-law. Who is Moses' father-in-law? What is he called there? He's called Jethro. Remember Jethro, the Midianite priest, who charged Moses with the keeping of some of his sheep. Well, Raguel, whenever you read the chapter 2 of this book, the book of Numbers, you will discover that Jethro had another name. He was also known as Raguel, or also as Ruel. And so we deduce very, very simply that this man Hobab is the son of Moses' father-in-law. When you put all of that together, it's another simple way of saying it is Hobab was Moses' brother-in-law. You remember Moses married Zipporah, and Zipporah had a number of other sisters. Well, Zipporah, it seems, also had a brother, and this man, her brother, was named Hobab. So here is Moses grabbing his brother-in-law, and he wants his brother-in-law to join him on the journey to Canaan. In Exodus chapter 18, you find that Jethro came and he met Moses in the wilderness. And you remember the bit of advice that the father-in-law gave to Moses. He saw that Moses was dealing with all of these complaints, all of the queries and all of the quandaries that the people of God had for him. And he said to Moses, "Moses, this isn't a good thing for you to deal with it all yourself." And he gave Moses the advice there to set up 70 men, 70 elders, and they would, as they had been equipped by God, they would deal with some of these complaints. Moses didn't have to do all of the work. And so even there you find the principle of the subdivision of labor in the work of God. It's there in Exodus chapter 18. But then we find that Jethro, or this man as he's described here as Raguel the Midianite, he goes back to Midian, he goes back home. But his son, Moses' brother-in-law, Hobab, it seems stays with the people of God. He's content with them, and he stays with them for about a year. But now, there is the call to eventually, as you read the latter part of this chapter, the call to move, the call to pack up all of the tents, and the call to go. And just a few days before this call came to go, Moses, he ushers this invitation to his brother-in-law to stick with us and to come with us on the journey. Yes, it's going to be a difficult journey. It's going to be a hard journey. But come thou with us, Hobab, and we as the Lord's people will do thee good. And he goes on to say in the verses following, the Lord will do you good in sticking with us, and we will do thee good in turn. And that really is the clarion call and invitation of every Christian to their unsaved and lost loved ones and friends and family and neighbours and work colleagues, etc. Is to come with us, and we'll do you good. No, we'll not do you good because there's anything inherently good about us or in us, but we will do thee good in the sense that, as the Bible says, the Lord is good. And the Lord will do you good in being a child of God. And that is the desire. I know from knowing the people of God here, I know from knowing my own heart, that is the desire that every Christian has for you who are not a Christian in this meeting, is to come with us. To come with us. Come with us on the journey to heaven, and eventually then end up in glory and heaven and bliss with us. We don't want you to miss out. We don't want you to go to a lost eternity and miss out on the splendor of heaven. It's to come with us, and we'll do thee good. So let's think about this invitation that Moses gives to his brother-in-law, Hobab, this evening. The first thing I want you to see here is the peril of Hobab. The peril of Hobab. Verse 29, Moses said to Hobab, the son of Raguel, the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law, we're journeying unto the place of which the Lord said, I will give it you. Come thou with us, and we will do thee good. Now, we're not told this man Hobab's nationality, but we can logically deduce it from Scripture. He's described here as the son of Raguel, or Jethro, as he's otherwise known as in the Bible. And we read here, he's the son of Raguel, the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law. So his father, Jethro, or Raguel, was a Midianite, and we can deduce then that in all likelihood this man Hobab was a Midianite as well. So he's not amongst the people of God. He's not an Israelite. He's a Midianite. Now straight away, those who know the Old Testament, you'll know that alarm bells will be ringing when you think of the Midianites. Who were the Midianites? Well, they were an ancient enemy of the people of God. We could use many portions to highlight this to you, but you think of the well-known one, for example, there in the book of Judges, where we read of the account of Gideon. And how, of course, he dwindled his army down to 300 men. Who was he fighting against in Judges 6-8? He was fighting against the Midianites. So the Midianites were an ancient enemy of God's people. So this man, currently, he belongs to a group who are the enemies of the people of God. And when you go on into this book in Numbers 31, you will find that this people, the Midianites, they were so idolatrous that the Lord, being unable to tolerate their sin, what does he do? He stirs up Moses to go to battle with the Midianites. And when you read Numbers 31 carefully, you'll find that they slew the kings of Midian, they took the food of the Midianites, and they burned even their castles to the ground. And all of their warriors, all of the males from a certain age upward, they were destroyed. And the point I'm making is this, is that if Hobab did not listen to and respond to this invitation and went back amongst the Midianites, when you think of the ages, he probably in all likelihood would have been in this battle. And so you see here that this is really his last opportunity, although he doesn't know it yet. But his people, the ancient enemies of the people of God, are going to go against the people of God in battle, and they're going to lose the battle. They're going to be slaughtered. And so unknown to Hobab, this is probably his final opportunity to cast his lot in and throw his lot in with the people of God. Unknown to him, his people will be destroyed in the not too distant future. And when you think about the plight of the unsaved individual, you this evening, if you're not a Christian, you think of the Midianites. Well, what were they? Well, they were an idolatrous people. And when we are not Christians, make no mistake about it, my friend, but if you're not living for the Lord, you're living for another God. And so you are an idolater by virtue of not being a Christian. That sound a little bit harsh, but if you're not living for the Lord, you're living for something else. And the first and greatest commandment is this, is to love the Lord with all of our heart, God, our soul, mind, and strength. And then, of course, to love our neighbour as ourselves. So when we love other things, we're not living for God. We are idolaters, and we are enemies of the Lord, and therefore, by virtue, enemies of God's people. If we're not a part of the people of God, if we're not for them, we're not with them, we're against them. Jesus makes that clear. He who's not with me, he says in the Gospels, is against me. If you're not with the Lord and not with his people tonight, you're against the Lord, and yes, may not openly be against them, but in your heart, if you're not with them, you are against them. And so this is a very, very striking opportunity that we give to you this evening. Come thou with us in light of the fact that you might be ruined sooner than you know. You might be heading to a lost eternity, and just like Hobab, you might not even realize that it's closer than you might think. And I'm aware that many of you here, you're of a certain age, you're fairly young, and you think to yourself, well, I have many years, decades before me. The reality is that we are not to boast ourselves of tomorrow. We don't know what a day may bring forth. Look at verse 33 of this chapter. We read that they departed from the mount 3 days' journey. The ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them 3 days' journey to search out a resting place for them. Almost as Hobab receives this invitation, the Lord says it's time to move. It's time to go. Remember how the God led the people of God, that the ark was in the center, the ark of the covenant, as it's spoken of here in verse 33, and springing from the ark was the pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. And it seems the cloud, what does it do? It begins to move. And so here we find the presence of God is here at this moment in time, but the presence of God soon withdraws from this particular locality. He's saying, Hobab, you have a chance here, one chance to get it right, and if not, I'm moving on. And that's how God works, you know. He comes and he speaks very definitely, and then he moves on. Don't presume that if God's speaking to you now, that he will speak to you and strive with you in the same manner the next time you hear the word of God. That might not be the case. It wasn't the case with this man, Hobab. The Lord moved on. He moved the people of God into the wilderness of Paran. And he could move on from you. John 3 tells us that the Spirit blows where it lists. In other words, we don't know what the Spirit of God is going to do from one moment to the next. And so don't presume on God speaking to you again. Come thou with us. Come thou with us. And we'll do you good. You know, in Italy there was an old prince who was famous for his long forbearance, and he had a particular servant that he found that he often had to forgive or look past some of his misdemeanors. And on one occasion, this old servant, he came into the presence of this prince, and he had his hat on. And you know that if you come before the presence of royalty, well, the first thing you do is remove your hat. It's out of respect. It's a mark of respect. And the king, or the prince, asked this man, why was he wearing a hat? The servant said, well, Prince, I've got a cold. And the prince, tiring of this man and his forbearance just kind of running out, he said this, I will take care of you in a way that you will never get a cold again. And he commanded another servant to take him outside and to take a nail and nail the hat to his head. He had given up. His forbearance had passed. And my friend, you do not know when God will stop striving with you. Hobab didn't know that in a few moments' time that the Lord would move on and the people of God would be against the Midianites and entering into battle and slaughtering them. You don't know. You don't know. We have here the peril of Hobab. I want you to see, secondly, the promise to Hobab. There was a promise made here, very simply, verse 29. Moses said, we're journeying to the place of which the Lord said, I will give it you. Come thou with us, and we will do thee good. And so Moses is seeking to persuade his brother-in-law to join him on the journey to Canaan. And he says very simply, come with us. Now I want you to notice how he seeks to persuade his brother-in-law. He speaks of the promise of God to the people of God. Look at it again, verse 29. We're journeying to the place of which the Lord said, I will give it you. So you see what he's saying here to Hobab. He's saying to Hobab, the Lord has said to his people, he has promised that he has given this people a land, a place. It will be their inheritance. It will be theirs to enjoy. Yes, they're going to have to enter into it. They're going to have to possess it, as you read of in the book of Joshua. But he's promising this land to them. But notice also that as they would seek to go to that land, that he also promises them his favour as they were on the way to that land. Verse 29, come with us, and we will do thee good. And so he's actually intimating here to Hobab, his brother-in-law, that the Lord's favour is upon us as we go to this land which God has promised to us. So he promises not merely to him a place and to the people of God a place, but he promises to them favour, the favour of God in getting to that place and reaching that place. Now this was going to be required. The Lord's people, as we know, as we read through these books of Exodus and Numbers and Leviticus and Deuteronomy, we know that the people of God went through many hardships and many difficulties in getting to the place. And then even in the book of Joshua, you find that they had many battles in securing and procuring that place. And yet all the while God said, I'll give them this place and I'll be with them as they seek to enter into that place. And so he's promising them here a place, but also he's promising them favour on the path to the place. And you know, this is one of the benefits and blessings that the Lord's people enjoy. They enjoy firstly a place, the promise of a place. We know of that place. I quoted it in prayer, John 14. Jesus says in verses 2 and 3, I go to prepare a place for you. So heaven is a promised and a prepared place laid up for the people of God. But God not merely promises the people of God a place, an inheritance, but he promises them that he will be with them on the path to the place. And so he's promising them, yes, a place, all that is laid up for us in heaven, but the favour of God in getting there. As you look at the path to heaven tonight, and you say the path to heaven is too difficult. And maybe you're like Hobab and you're dithering about this decision. Well, what I would simply say to you is this, is the Lord will do you good as you seek to be on the journey and the path and the road to heaven. The Lord will do you good. The Lord will promise that if he's going to take you to the place, he will be sure, my friend, he'll get you there to heaven. Sometimes we fear, will I really make it? Will I really enter heaven? Will I really enjoy the sweet by and by? And yet you look on at the Christian, just as I'm sure Hobab, the brother-in-law, you know what it's like with in-laws and brothers-in-law. There's this type bond, and I'm sure that Hobab looked on at Moses as he led the people of God, and he probably thought to himself, how can Moses lead all of those people and endure all of the hardships and enjoy at times the mundanity of the diet that God had given to them? How is Moses doing all of this? But the Lord was doing him good. All the while, as Moses was going through hardship and going through difficulty, he was speaking to Hobab. And the same with you tonight. Observe the Christian. As the hymnist says, we wrestle on towards heaven. It's not an easy road, as the hymnist says. And yet, whilst there's nothing good in us and we cannot keep ourselves, the Lord promises us good. Surely goodness, Psalm 23, and mercy follows us some of the days of our life. No, all the days of our lives. Why? That one day we will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Surely goodness and mercy follows the Christian. And God is saying to you tonight, when you enter into Jesus Christ, the goodness and mercy, the favour of God will accompany you on the road to heaven. And what is the other alternative to this? Well, it's hell. And what is hell? Hell's many things. But ultimately, hell is the absence of God to the extreme. See, here even in earth, you see evidences of the beauty and glory of God in terms of creation, in terms of his provision for you. Even in terms of his Spirit striving with you now, I trust. But in hell, there's none of that. Hell is a place where goodness is absent. And so in hell, you find nothing but the presence of evil, not of good. So that's the other choice. That's the other side of the coin. You either know the favour of God on earth, and it takes you to a land of plenty, a place where you will experience the presence of God, the like of which you've never experienced, or else you dismiss him here on earth. You go through life without the presence of God, empty and barren, to enter into a place where there is nothing but evil and terror. Paul spoke of this dual promise to Timothy, you know. In 2 Timothy, he was discouraged. And yet towards the end of his ministry, Paul writing to Timothy, he said this in 2 Timothy 4 verse 8, and telling him to keep going. He said, "There's laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day." He said to Timothy, "I'm going home soon. I'm going to receive a crown." But yet in the previous chapter, chapter 3, he not only spoke of the place in chapter 4, but he spoke of the path to the place in chapter 3, verse 11. Listen to this path that Paul trod on the road to heaven. "Persecutions, afflictions, which came to me at Antioch, at Iconium, at Lystra, what persecutions I endured, but out of them all the Lord delivered me." So there's laid up for me glory. But I knew the favour of heaven in getting there, even though it was difficult and even though it was hard. Yes, the road to heaven is not a very well-known road, but we can say this, the Christian, it's certainly a well-travelled road. The Christian travels the road to heaven well. Why? Because the Lord is with him. And we say, come with us tonight. Come and know the help of God on the road to heaven. Come thou with us and we'll do thee good. So the peril of Hobab, the promise to Hobab. I want you to see thirdly here the predicament of Hobab. You can see here in verse 30, he has this predicament. He said to him, that's Hobab saying to Moses, "I will not go, but I will depart to mine own land and to my kindred." And so he's at Camp Sinai here, Hobab. He's amongst the people of God, and it seems that whilst they're there and not moving on, and there isn't the hassle of packing up the tent and packing up the family and moving on at the bidding of God, it seems for a little season, for a year, Hobab is quite content to cast his lot in and to remain with the people of God. But all of a sudden, it's time to move, it's time to go, it's time to follow the Lord. And at first, notice what he says, verse 30, I will not go. Why? I will depart to mine own land and to my kindred. He wants to go back home. He wants to go back to his own people, you see. He wants to go back to the Midianites. Now, we know that his sister, Zipporah, was married to Moses. He's Moses' brother-in-law. And yes, he would have had his sister there with him, but all of this would have been strange to him. You know what it's like? He feels like an outsider amongst the people of God. They're Israelites, but he's a Midianite, you know. His people are different. They worship different gods. They operate in a different way. They have different rules and regulations in terms of how to live for God. And as I said, in Exodus chapter 18, we discover that his father, Jethro, or Raguel as he's named here in these verses, his father has already gone back to Midian. And not only that, but he has taken his sisters with him. So the only earthly relation he has is Zipporah, who is with Moses at this stage. And the predicament is very simply this, is that there's this promise of verse 29, that Moses extends to his brother-in-law. Come with us, and the Lord will be with you. The Lord will do you good, and you will inherit the land of promise. There's this tug of war in the land flowing with milk and honey, all of the blessings and bounty of Canaan, versus leaving my family, leaving my old life, leaving the Midianite way of doing things. And so it seems that the tug of home, well, he feels it. The tug of his people, he feels it. The tug of his old life, he certainly feels it. The tug of his sisters in Midian and his father there, Jethro in Midian, he feels it. He feels what it would be to not necessarily turn his back on them, but certainly to be now amongst the people of God and to cast his lot in and throw his lot in with the Lord's people. And often when we receive this proposal from Christ, you face this predicament as well. You have this kind of a decision and you're weighing it up, aren't you? Go in the ways that God has set forth before me. Go through Jesus Christ and know his presence in life here. Why? So that you may ultimately in death enter into heaven. But at the same time, that may require turning your back on the old life. It does require it. It requires turning your back on the old way of life. And so you have here the supposed joys that you seem to experience here on earth against the joys and blisses that are laid up for you in heaven. And can I even say that a Christian can say with Paul that he is full of joy unspeakable and full of glory. Yes, at times the Christian life is difficult. At times you go through tribulations in this life. But ultimately, Paul was able to say in Corinthians, as sorrowful what, yet always rejoicing. Because even though you may lose many things in life, and you may lose friends, and you may lose the respect and esteem of family or people or whatever it might be that you might lose, you will know ultimately that all is well with your soul. And you'll know the peace of God in knowing that all is well with your soul. And so, my friend, you have all of these barriers and all of these things that are erected against the joy and bliss of the land of rest and promise. What are you going to choose tonight? Who are you going to choose to follow this evening? Are you going to persist on in the ways of sin and ungodliness? Are you going to say, I'm repenting of sin and I'm running after Jesus Christ? You think of the Lord Jesus as he spoke to a man and told him to rise up and to follow him. We looked at this a number of weeks ago in the midweek. Luke 9:59, this man, as he was beckoned of God to follow Jesus Christ, we read that he said to him, Lord, suffer me first to go and bury my father. Now, at face value, this seems to be a reasonable request. His father, it seems, is deceased and he wants to go and bury his father. But what does the Lord Jesus say in the next verse? Let the dead bury their dead. Rise up and follow me. And there are other times, as I highlighted a number of weeks ago, there are other times when God does suffer us to go back to family. Think of Elisha. He went back to his village and kissed his family goodbye before following Elijah. But with this man, he was testing him. Testing him as to where his allegiances really lay. And my friend, he's testing you tonight. Where is your allegiance going to lie? Is it going to lie with the world? Going to lie with the ways of unrighteousness? Or are you going to rise up and to follow Jesus Christ? This was Lot's wife's issue, wasn't it? She, of course, left the city of destruction. She left Sodom. It was going to be rained with fire and brimstone of heaven. But what did she do? She was leaving it. She looked back. She looked back. And as soon as she looked back, that's because that's where her heart really lay. This one look showed where her heart really lay. God turned her into a pillar of salt. A look back is a look that banishes. It brings the condemnation of God. And so here you have this offer set before you. The promise of heaven. The presence of God. The presence of heaven. You're going to take him and take Christ and all that he offers you this evening. Turn your back on him. Of course, you'll be aware here that we were in Londonderry before we came here. And if you've ever been up there in holidays or on a visit or whatever, you'll know that the one thing that is hard to get your head around in Londonderry is all of those bridges. It's very easy when you get your head around it and you live there for a while, but it's hard when you're maybe just a visitor. You have the main one to the far side of the city. It's called the Foyle Bridge. We live not too far away from the Foyle Bridge, about a 5-minute drive from the Foyle Bridge. But it's really, really high. Really high. And often if you were heading to the other side of the city and you would go that way, or if it was going that way or visiting or whatever it might have been, you would come to the whole way to the Foyle Bridge. And very often you would find that there was a barrier. And the barrier was there, of course, because, well, it was too windy. It often was closed. Often you had to go back and go over one of the other bridges. And perhaps there's just one or two barriers that you've erected this evening. Maybe if you're honest, you're just as obstinate as old Hobab here in verse 30. I will not go. I'll depart to mine own land and to my kindred. And maybe if you're honest, it's family that is just the barrier that's stopping you from crossing over. The peril of Hobab, the promise to Hobab, the predicament of Hobab. Lastly and quickly, I just want you to notice the partnership of Hobab. Verse 31, he said, that's Moses said, leave us not, I pray thee. For as much as thou knowest how we are to encamp in the wilderness, and thou mayest be to us instead of ice. Verse 30, he initially didn't want to go. He didn't want to go. In fact, he's very adamant here. I will not go. I'm going back to my own land. But Moses continues to persuade him. And he says in verse 31, you might be to us, thou mayest be to us instead of ice. And it seems that Hobab then eventually did come. He came on board. He joined with the people of God to the extent of, we read in verse 33, that they departed 3 days' journey, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them 3 days' journey to search out a resting place for them. So he eventually comes, and the point is this, is that he became, as Moses said, he became his eyes. You see, it seems this individual, he knew more of the wilderness than Moses. It was fairly foreign to this man who had been raised in the palace of Egypt. And so he was instead of eyes for the people of God. He knew the land. He knew where to find water. He knew where to find pasture. And so after coming amongst the people of God and being a part of the people of God, he was immediately put to use amongst the people of God. All that he had learned in his former days were used in the service of God, and actually used in the preservation of the people of God. Eventually you pick up this man Hobab. You read of him again in Judges chapter 4. You read there of one of the judges, an individual named Jael. A very gruesome story in Judges 4. There you find Sisera, the captain. He ends up in the tent of Jael. What does Jael do? He takes a tent peg and he hammers the peg into the forehead of Sisera. What's the importance of that? Well, Jael was a descendant of Hobab. He was one of his family. And that is how we know that Hobab threw his lot in with the people of God. Because even the family, generations down the line, they were employed as they were in the service of God and in the warfare of the people of God. And like Hobab, with conversion there comes the presence of Christ, the person of Christ, and productivity for Jesus Christ. God not only saves you, but he sets you to work for him. And not only do you enjoy these blessings, but you trust in the days that come, that when you become a Christian, that you see others of your family, even generations, raised up to serve Jesus Christ. Because as you become familiar with the ways of God, you then begin to teach others and instruct others of your nearest and dearest. What a joy, what an opportunity that is set before you tonight. All of the Christians here, I of course, but all of the Christians here, they're saying to you tonight who are not a Christian, come with us. Come with us and we'll do you good. The Lord will do you good. You'll know the favour of heaven, and you would even possibly see this blessing flow and trickle down into your family and into the generations to come. Come thou with us, and we will do thee good. And we trust that you will join us on that journey this evening. We're going to close our service tonight by just singing a few verses of a hymn that's very much in keeping with what we've been looking at tonight, hymn 599. 599, page 418 of the book. And we'll just sing the first two verses of this hymn.